Hello friends, welcome to Communication Skills for Everyone. In this channel, you're going to learn English language skills, personality development, vocabulary, and all-round development.
Today, let us learn approaches and methods in language teaching. Let us attempt to understand different approaches and methods of teaching English. So before, what is language teaching approach? What is language teaching approach? So when we say a language teaching approach is a way of thinking about teaching and learning. Approach is a way of thinking about teaching and learning. An approach can produce methods. Methods which are the way of teaching something, particularly a second or foreign language, using techniques or activities. So what are method and what are method and approach? We may get question like what are method and approach? Method and approach are similar. These two are similar terms, but there are some key differences. An approach is the way of dealing with something, whereas a method involves the process. Method involves the process or steps taken to handle the issue or task. So let us look at direct method. In the direct method, all the teaching occurs in the target language. So encouraging the learners to think in the target language. The learner doesn't practice translation or use their native language in the classroom. So here they have to use only the target language. So the practitioners of this method, direct method, generally believes that learners should experience a second language without any interference from their native language. So instructors do not emphasize rigid grammar rules but teach it indirectly through induction. So which means that learners figure out grammar rules on their own by practicing the language. The goal for students is to develop connections between experience and language. Learners do this by concentrating on good pronunciation and the development of oral skills. This method improves one's understanding, fluency, reading, and listening skills among the students. Standard techniques in direct method are question and answer, conversation, reading aloud, writing, and student self-correction for this language learning method. So let us move to the second one, grammar translation method. With this method, the student learns primarily by translating to and from the target language. So where the teachers or facilitators encourage the learner to memorize grammar rules and vocabulary lists. So there is little or no emphasis on speaking and listening. Teachers conduct classes in the student's native language with the ESL teaching method. So this method, two primary goals are to progress the learner's reading ability to understand literature in the second language. So they develop reading ability and promote the learner's overall intellectual development. Grammar drills are a common approach. So another popular activity is translation exercises that emphasize the form of writing instead of the content. Though the grammar translation method was one of the most popular language teaching methods in the past, right? It has significant disadvantages that have caused it to fall out of favor in modern schools. Primarily, students often have trouble conversing in the second language because they receive no instruction in oral skills. So that's what these are some of the drawbacks. Let us move to audiolingual method. In this audiolingual method, Method encourages students to develop habits that support language learning. Students learn primarily through pattern drills, particularly dialogues, which the teacher uses to help students practice and memorize the language. These dialogues follow standard configurations of communication. There are four types of dialogues utilized in audiolingual method. So one, repetition. So repetition in which the student repeats the teacher's statement exactly. Second, inflection. So in inflection, what happens where one of the words appears in different form from the previous sentence. For example, a word may change from the singular to plural. Third one, replacement. Replacement, which involves one word being replaced with another while the sentence construction remains the same. And third one, restatement, where the learner rephrases the teacher's statement. So these are the four steps: repetition, inflection, replacement, and restatement. This technique's name comes from the order it uses to teach language skills. So this starts with listening and speaking, followed by reading and writing, meaning that emphasizes hearing and speaking the language before experiencing its written form. Because of this, teachers use only the target language in the classroom. Only the target language in the classroom. The next one, structural approach. So main elements of this structural approach: understand language as a set of grammatical rules that should be learned one at a time in a specific order. It focuses on mastering these structures, building one skill on top of another instead of memorizing vocabulary. This is similar to how young children learn a new language naturally. An example we can look at: the structural approach is teaching the present tense of a verb like to be before progressing to more advanced verb tenses like the present continuous tense that uses to be as an auxiliary. So the structural approach teaches all four central language skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. It's a technique that teachers can implement with many other language teaching methods. Next, total physical response method. It's also popularly known as TPR method. TPR method highlights oral comprehension by allowing the learner to respond to basic commands like open the door or sit down, turn off the fan. It combines language and physical movements for a comprehensive learning experience. So in ordinary TPR, total physical response class, the teacher would give verbal commands in the target language with a physical movement. The student would respond by following the commands with a physical action of their own. It helps students actively connect meaning to the language and passively identify the language's structure. So many teachers use TPR alongside other methods of language learning. While TPR can help learners of all ages, it is used most often with young students and beginners. It's a nice option for an English teaching method to use alongside some of the other ones in the list. Like for example, so we know that pick up the, as an example, a game that could under TPR is Simon Says, or do the following as a simple review activity: pick up your pencil, pick up your pencil, stand behind me, someone, put your water bottle under your chair, so on, like this. Maybe there are certain instructions are given to the students. Next, communicating language teaching. So, communicating language teaching stresses interaction and communication to teach a second language effectively. Students participate in every situations they are likely to encounter in the target language. For instance, learners may practice introductory conversations, offering suggestions, making invitations, complaining or expressing time or location. So instructors also incorporate learning topics outside of conventional grammar so that students develop the ability to respond in diverse situations. Communicating language teaching teachers focus on being facilitators rather than straightforward instructors. Doing so helps students accomplish CLT's primary goal, learning to communicate in the target language instead of emphasizing the mastery of grammar. So, the role play, interviews, group work, and opinion sharing are popular activities practiced in communicating language teaching, along with certain games like scavenger hunts and information gap exercises that promote student interaction. Next one, natural approach. This approach focuses to mimic natural language learning with a focus on communication and instruction through exposure. It de-emphasizes formal grammar training. Instead, instructors concentrate on creating a stress-free environment and avoiding forced language production from students. Teachers also do not explicitly correct student mistakes. The goal is to reduce student anxiety and encourage them to engage with the second language spontaneity. So classroom procedures commonly used or in this natural approach are problem solving activities, learning games, effective humanistic tasks that involve the students' own ideas, and content practices that synthesize various subject matter like culture. Next one, task-based language teaching. Students complete real-world tasks using their target language. This technique encourages fluency by boosting the learner's confidence with each activity or task accomplished and reduced direct mistake. Activities fall under three categories. Information gap. So, information gap are activities which involve the transfer of information from one person, place, or from to another. Reasoning gap task or activity. This asks a student to discover new knowledge from a given set of information using inference, reasoning, perception, and deduction. Opinion gap activities in which students react to a particular situation by expressing their feelings and opinions. Popular classroom tasks or activities practiced in task-based learning include presentations on an assigned topic and conducting interviews with peers or adults in the target language, or having students work together to make a poster and then do a short presentation about a current event. There are just a couple of examples. There are literally thousands of things one can do in the classroom. It's considered to be a modern method of teaching English. One huge advantage of task-based learning is that students have some degree of freedom to learn the language they want to learn. Also, they can learn some self-reflection and teamwork skills as well. So next, Suggestopedia. The Suggestopedia language learning method. This approach and method in language teaching was devised in the 1970s by psychotherapist Georgi Lognow. It is sometimes also known as the positive suggestion method, but it later on became sometimes known as Suggestopedia. Apart from using physical surroundings and a good classroom atmosphere to make students feel comfortable, main tenets of this second language teaching method. So here, despairing where the teacher introduces new grammar and vocabulary, uh, concert sessions where the teacher reads a text and students follow along with music in the background. This can be both active and passive. Elaboration, so where students finish what they have learned with dramas, songs, or games. Interaction, in which the teacher introduces new things in a playful manner. Production, where the students speak and interact with correction or interruption. The next one, silent way. The silent way is an interesting ESL teaching method that isn't that common, but it does have some solid footing. After all, the goal in most language classes is to make them as student centered as possible. So, in the silent way, the teacher talks as little as possible with the idea that students learn best when discovering things on their own. Learners are encouraged to be independent and to discover and figure out languages on their own. Instead of talking, the teacher uses gestures and facial expressions to communicate, as well as props, including the famous quasar rods. These rods of different colors and lengths. Although it's not practical to teach an entire course using the silent way, but it does certainly have some value as a language teaching approach to remind teachers to talk less and get students talk more. Next one, we have functional notional way, functional notional approach. Parts of speech like, so this language is purposeful communication. Nouns, verbs, exit. The reason people talk is the way you want to communicate something to someone else. So your language method is to evaluate students how will they use the language. Parts of speech like nouns, verbs exist to express language, functions and notions. People speak to inform, agree, question, persuade, evaluate and perform various other functions. Language is also used to talk about concepts or notions like time, event, place, so on and so forth. And this method evaluate how students will use the language. This will serve as a guide for what students be taught in the class. Teaching specific grammar patterns or vocabulary sets does play a role, but the purpose for which students need to know these things should always be kept in mind with a functional notional approach to English teaching. Next one, the bilingual method. The bilingual method uses two languages in the classroom, the mother tongue and the target language. Mother tongue and the target language. Two languages are used in this method, so that's why it's called bilingual language. The mother tongue is briefly used for grammar and vocabulary explanations. Then the rest of the class is conducted in English. Next one, the teach, test approach. This style of language teaching is ideal for directly targeting students' needs. It's best for intermediate or advanced learners. It is not fit for beginners. Not fit for beginners. So there are three stages: a test or task of some kind that requires students to use the target language; explicit teaching or focus on accuracy with controlled practice exercises; Another test or task. This is to see if students have improved in their use of the target language. So this is about the test, teach, test approach. Triple T. So these are various methods we discussed in this video, right? This talks about uh, popular approaches and methods in language teaching. So in the beginning I mentioned what is an approach. Language teaching approach is a way of thinking about teaching and learning. An approach can produce methods. So method, what is the method? Method is the way of teaching something. Method is a way of teaching something. So here, what is the difference between method and approach? These are almost similar, but there is a key difference. An approach is the way of dealing with something, whereas the method involves the process or steps taken to handle the issue or task. This is about method and approach. Thank you for watching. Subscribe Communication Skills for Everyone for more academic and educational videos.